With the Millennial Coach discussing topics on real life. Check it out. Everywhere you go, don't forget the ghetto. Listen to the call. Don't forget the ghetto. With the Millennial Coach. Don't forget the ghetto. 'Cause it's the best show on radio.
Welcome to the call with me, the Millenial Coach. And today I have a really cool guest. We call each other sister. We haven't physically met, but she's all the way in South Africa. And she is a fantastic life coach, and she goes by the name of Phoenix Rising. And I think everyone knows what that means when a phoenix rises. So I want to say hi and welcome to Tola Benny. Hey, Tola.
Hey, what's up?
Thank you for joining us. Looking forward to the conversation today, which is we're looking at the differences between how different cultures or ethnicities are treated in both South Africa and in the UK. And I think more to the point, you know, we will verge on more of what happens with the Black culture, and we will look at other cultures as well. But just before we get into that, just remember that you can catch me on every single platform, which is iHeartRadio, Google, Amazon, Apple, Stitcher, Deezer, and also Tola's actual podcast. You can catch her also on the same platforms of Phoenix Rising with she has a lot of different motivational speakers on her show. So please feel free to check her out. She's also on Instagram all the time. And you're also on Twitter, Facebook, correct?
Hardly on Facebook, but I try.
Yeah, I know. It's just a lot to keep up.
I do. I have a business account on Facebook that's more active than the personal account. And it's also under Phoenix Rising Life Coach, yeah.
Excellent. So I just want to ask, before we start today's show, what made you into the life coach that you are? And why did you start doing a podcast?
Yes, I love it. I love talking about myself. So I lost my job in 2019. I was retrenched due to lack of funding. I used to work in HIV research, a job that I really love. And I've always said I want to do something where I feel like I make an impact in other people's lives. And that's why I chose to go into HIV research, because I felt it gave me that opportunity. But unfortunately, HIV research operates under grant funding. And so there was no more funding. And so the whole office pretty much was retrenched. And then I had to stay at home and rethink my life going forward. And so the opportunity to train as a life coach came along, and I took it with both hands. And again, really being motivated by the fact that I want to do something where I feel that I'm making a difference in other people's lives. And so life coaching felt like what I was being called to do next. So then podcasting. So I got certified as a life coach in 2020, beginning of 2020. That was in January. And then in March, COVID happened. Just as I was launching my business.
Don't remind me. Do not remind me.
Yes. You know, that I always feel like COVID is sitting there thinking everybody blames me for their misfortunes. But it's true. And so then I couldn't launch my business. Or, you know, people don't have money, well, in South Africa at least, to invest in things like life coaching because they see it as a luxury. And so I struggled to get clients, right? And then I thought, you know, I stumbled across podcasting as I was sitting at home thinking what to do with myself, learning my French lessons. I take French lessons, and I was learning on this podcast, and I thought, well, why not start my own podcast? A number of things happened which led me on to discovering podcasting, and taking French lessons being one of them. And so I just started talking about my journey, me losing my job and me trying to find new direction in terms of where I was going forward. And then I started, because I was talking about myself and trying to motivate others, that there is life after a 9-to-5 job. You can recreate yourself. So the whole thing of a phoenix rising is based on that. And then I started inviting guests, because people don't want to hear me talking about myself all the time, right? So then I started inviting people. Unfortunately, they don't want to sit there and listen to me talking about, which is a shame. So then I started inviting people like yourself and other coaches, people who are coaching in different areas of life, to come and talk about their journeys and share tips and tools and, all of those things of how to recreate your life, especially after you have experienced some kind of adversity. And here we are, season 2, 31 episodes later. I'm still going, and I'm loving it every moment.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So what would you say to somebody who was in your situation, but they don't have the energy to look for their passion or to rediscover themselves? What would you recommend or suggest? Because COVID has been brutal on so many levels. And lockdown has really impacted so many people from a mental health perspective. So
yes. So, and you are so right, because mental health has suffered a lot. I think pretty much everyone that I have met and spoken to has suffered some kind of depression. It doesn't have to be clinical depression, but some level of depression, some dark moments, right? Suicidal thoughts for some, different extremes. It depends really who you are and your circumstances. And I've had dark moments as well. And for me, I think what pulled me out of it was, I feel like you have to find something that keeps you going. For me, it was my kids. I have 2 beautiful daughters. And when moments were dark and I was thinking I could probably end it, and I don't have to do this, and then thought about my kids, like I could never ever do that to my kids. So that's what pulled me out of that. And so from there, it's to say, okay, then what can I do? And then when you're sitting with yourself, somehow eventually you get to a point where you pull it out of yourself. There's something in all of us. There is, I promise you that. If everything was removed, all the external things, the distractions, you will find something within yourself that wants to come out. For me, I found that by starting to write. I started a blog, and I started writing because I was writing about my experiences of living under lockdown. And then when writing was not enough anymore, I started talking and recording myself on my cell phone, and I started doing interviews with people and recording them. And so that was me finding my reason for going. And the more I discovered that I love doing this, the more I became that person, the more I became the writer, Tola the writer, Tola the podcaster, Tola the motivator, and then I was loving it and I fell in love with it, like I said, and I just kept going. So I think, I always say this to my kids, for all of us, there is something deep inside that's wanting to come out. And if all external distractions are removed, you will find it.
That is so beautiful. That's a beautiful story, and a lot of people don't take into consideration the importance of being undistracted. Because if you can be still, be still and hear God, or whatever the saying is.
Oh my gosh.
To be still is such an important aspect of this self-discovery. And if we sometimes I will go out for a couple of hours without my phone, because it gets to a point where we are always trying to be connected to something or somebody, but we forget to get connected with ourselves.
Yes. 100%, 100%. And you are so right. You will not hear God if you are always distracted. And I know that sometimes we use distractions because we cannot cope with ourselves,
reality.
with and also being with yourself. You know, some people cannot cope with just being with themselves, and so we use these distractions. We use our phones, we sit on Instagram, we sit on Facebook, whatever, but you will never hear God unless you put the phone down and sit with yourself.
I love that. I love
Yeah.
that. Seriously. So thank you for your introduction and actually introducing yourself. It was, you know, somebody said one time to me, you know, you're very me. And I said, what do you mean by that? But they didn't understand the context of what that means in, you know, in the Western world. So I said, when you say you've done something, do I compare myself to you? They said no. And then they're like, okay, that's not the term that I mean. I said, sometimes we can, experience is our best teacher. It's our only teacher.
Yes.
And sometimes, this is something I learned a long time ago from Oprah, right? Sometimes you can learn from other people's mistakes. Doesn't mean you have to go and make the same mistake.
Yes.
So this is why open your eyes when you're around people. And I do say to people, you know, the fruit of people's labor is where they're at in their life. So if your fruits are not popping, maybe you need to think about where you're at in your life and your mind.
Yeah.
Hence the reason being still is very important to listen to where your next journey or your next assignment of life is going to take you. So, you know, we have a plethora now of coaches in the world. Everyone's a coach. And I'm very selective of who I bring on the show because I don't feel that, I think there's a lot of people with titles, but no expertise, and they can't inspire even a dead cat. So I think it's very important for all of us to be very mindful when we say we're going to look for a coach. When you're handing your life to somebody, you know, that's a very, very personal experience, coaching. It's very important that that person can take you on that journey to release the emotion and to get you active in your own life.
Yes. And you are talking about experience being the teacher. And it's also very important, I think, for me to choose a coach. It has to be someone who has at least walked the walk. Because as you are correctly saying, everyone can be a coach. You can coach, you can read a book and learn to become a coach and qualify and all of that. But unless you have walked the walk, the things that I have learned in the past 2 years, I always say to my daughter, God had to take me there in order for me to understand what it takes, so that when I coach other people, I have walked the walk. I know what I'm talking about. I'm not just blowing steam out my, you know what.
Yes.
I've actually walked, though I know what it takes. So yes, experience is the best teacher.
Yeah, definitely. So thank you very much, Tola. I really appreciate your words. Talks about how amazing London is, but London has subsections of poverty.
Yeah.
And we are not always aware when you go to certain doctor's surgeries. Some people, their appointments at 11 o'clock, they won't get seen to 12, 12:30, 1 o'clock. My maximum time I've waited to see my doctor's absolute maximum is 20 minutes. And that is very rare. So these types of situations where it's, you know, systematically marginalized people seem to not be at the forefront of policy making. What do you think is the, you know, main concern, and how do people who don't have money tackle this? Because if you are not seen as soon as you can, where do you go?
Yeah, and you could die while you're waiting in the queue, right? It's a tough one. I mean, you ask me what can people do, and I'm not sure what they can do. I know in South Africa, when people are unhappy with the services that they get, they take it to the streets, and that's just the South African way. You know, when
It's
you
great.
see
It's a
people,
good way. And do you feel
Yeah.
that how effective do you feel protesting is? Because sometimes when we talk about protesting, it comes across as if people are disgruntled, but people are not being sane sometimes when it comes, because there's always police marching people off into, and arresting them. So
Yeah.
is when it comes to your health, why don't we have the same fight for it? We've got people protesting about lockdown and lifting like health to me is as important as lockdown or whatever, but we don't march for health as much as we march for a lot of other things.
That is true. That's true. And I'm not sure why is that. I can tell you though, as someone who, when I said to you earlier, I feel like God had to make me walk the walk in order to understand these things. Because prior, when I was fully employed and I was on the best medical aid, my employer was paying 90% of my bill. I was only paying 10%.
Amazing.
I was living in a bubble. So I could not tell you what marginalized communities are experiencing because I didn't need to know.
But that's
what I'm
interesting.
saying?
That's very interesting because, and I appreciate and applaud you for admitting that you were living in a bubble, and
Yeah.
you had no idea what marginalized communities were
No.
experiencing because you're not classified as a marginalized community.
And I've never had to walk in their shoes. I've never had to wait for a doctor for 5 hours to see me. So I feel like when people are not exposed to these things, it's their problem. It's not our problem.
Interesting.
You know what I'm saying? I feel like, back to your question, to answer your question, I feel like most people who have not experienced that or who are not part of the marginalized don't know the problems or understand the problems of the marginalized. And so it's easy to point fingers and say, oh, they are so ungrateful, or they always take it to the streets, or they are always aggressive, they do this, because you've never had to be put in that position. A week ago, I was interviewing Simon. I don't know if you know Simon, who's my friend on Instagram, and he's a fellow podcaster. And Simon was telling me about growing up in London as a mixed kid, because his mother was white, his father was Nigerian. And he said he grew up in the 70s. He went to school. He said he was in school with 130 odd white students, and he was the only black student. And he never experienced racism. But then again, Simon is light-skinned, right? So there's that whole thing of colorism. And I was listening to you talking about your school experiences being a black kid, especially dark-skinned one. And it made me remember a piece of research we did when I was doing my master's at varsity, and we were looking at racism in education. We were looking at, in the campus at university. What we found was that people assign different degrees of blackness to black people. I don't know, I'm going to have to repeat myself.
I hear that. And that's really important to note. And I don't know if people can hear Tola, but she said that with colorism, people repeat.
I said they assign different degrees of blackness.
Assign different degrees of blackness. I have to agree with you, because what happens in this country, I find fascinating, is, the lighter you are, bright, white is right, okay? But because I speak the way I speak, people tend not to dismiss me, because they're thinking, okay, I always get, you're not like the rest. And I ask people, so what do you mean by that? Yes. Because, the thing is, I choose to learn and travel and see things in a perspective that is unfamiliar to me, because I like to learn about culture. So I've been to Brazil, the Caribbean, Africa, lived in the Middle East, Europe. I travel and I like it. Because I always said to myself, my race will never be the reason I cannot achieve in this world. That's not going to be the reason. If you've got a problem with my skin complexion, That's your problem.
And here's the thing for me is the media. I think at this point, if you said to me, you don't think the media is partial, is partial the word, this is the right word that I'm looking for. If you said to me, you don't believe that they are biased, I think you would be lying, because at this point, it is so clear that they are biased. They only show or push a certain narrative, that pushes whatever the propaganda is. And I mean, let's take an example that everyone knows. Let's take how Africa is portrayed in the media. Africa,
yeah, it's like you're starving,
globally,
you've got no
globally.
food, you don't have shoes, you drink dirty water, and going to
lions
Ghana,
are roaming the streets. Lions are roaming the streets. Like nobody shows how beautiful Cape Town is, and Cape Town is in Africa. I'm currently watching this thing on Netflix. What's it called now? Where it's shot in Israel, in Tel Aviv. Hit and Run. Okay. And I've never been to that part of Africa, but I was just like, wow, it is so beautiful. It is so beautiful, but because all we know is that Africa is a jungle. Nobody ever shows the beauty that Africa is. So take that happens on a global scale, and then narrow it down.
Can I just say that this article was written 5 months ago?
5 months ago.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what you're saying, even though and that's why I love Instagram, because it shows real Africa. People show, when you're looking at travel with Black people traveling. I mean, I have got Senegal on my list, but now I want to go to Gambia, the beach. Oh my goodness. Beautiful.
Yes. So I was exposed to the beauty that is Africa. So I often say one of my regrets is that I haven't traveled much in Africa. I've traveled a lot overseas, the US a lot, Europe a lot, but I haven't traveled much in Africa, right? I've been to the nearest states like Swaziland and Mozambique and Zimbabwe, but not further, north. But one of the best experiences I had recently is I worked as a social media content creator for an account that the owner of the account she has an online magazine, and all she wanted was to show good things about Africa. And so I had to do research and look for good stories about Africa, the beautiful cities and all of those things, and how Africa is developing in terms of, tourism and other industries. And that is the closest I came to how beautiful Africa is and how it is not shared across the world. So that's your media, right? That's what they are feeding us. And so when you take that down to a micro level, now when you look at South Africa as, on the micro level, it's the same. They show us they show you guys outside of South Africa what they want you to see of it. Ungrateful people, 20, 30 years into democracy, they still behaving like animals. And.
It's very difficult for people to understand. Like you said earlier, if people don't experience a problem, how are they going to deal with the reality of the issue if you've never experienced it? I want to thank you again for anyone that has taken the time to listen, even if you did struggle to hear. And I do want to revisit this conversation because I do think it's exceptionally important.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate. I love having these conversations, and it was such an honor for me to be a part of this discussion.
Likewise.
So hopefully more in the future.
Yes. So this is itch.fm with me, the Millennial Coach, and you are locked into the course. So have a great weekend, everyone, and I will speak to you very soon.